sun just the same. Ventura Highway in the sunshine, with 'cause a free wind is blowing through your hair, and the days surround your daylight there. Seasons crying, no despair.
Ventura Highway by America, finishing us off for tonight. Tomorrow night, David Quantick will be here, so expect the unexpected, and we hope that you'll be here as well. This has been a Smooth Operation production. BBC Radio 2 is online on digital and on 88 and 91 FM.
Is that to deliver this vision, you need a well-organised, a professional, a well-funded charity sector. And our issue that sector leaders want to know is, rhetoric's fabulous, but the reality that we face is cuts in government funding, local councils making cuts. And our services don't come for free.
Linked certificates from National Savings gave you the rate of inflation, which is 5% at the moment, plus 1% on top. So 6% a year under the current terms, and that's more than double the better rates you'd get from banks and building societies at the moment. So it's not surprising that people rushed into these and now they've closed the gates.
A man in the American state of Oregon is suing a pest control company for £100,000, claiming that his hearing was damaged when it used explosives to remove rodents on his neighbour's property. Michael Lester says the blasts rattled his doors and windows, and the firm ignored his request to stop. BBC News at 3 minutes past 10, on next at 11.
Good evening. Right, pay attention. Now get set down and pin your luggles back, because this is going to be good. Oh, yes it is, because I'm in it. Well, carry on.
It was marvellous, ladies and gentlemen. It was just like going back to school, wasn't it, darling?
Yeah.
We all couldn't wait to see each other.
That's right.
And we worked for 6 weeks, and then we went off, but we did have a laugh, didn't we?
They were good fun, they made us laugh, and by the grace of God, they still make us laugh, because they were clean. A little naughty, but not dirty.
They are their own genre. More slapstick, escapism, and everyone has grew to love the characters that were involved.
So you are the great Caesar.
Ah, you recognized me.
I have seen your bust.
I wish I could say the same.
You either like them or you don't. I mean, it's a waste of time walking through life avoiding smut or pretending you know nothing about it.
Every member of a family can watch it together without embarrassment. You know you're going to be okay.
What's a nice girl like you doing with an old cow?
I'm taking her to the bull.
To the bull? Oh. Couldn't your father do that?
No, it has to be the bull.
It was a good title, Carry On This, Carry On That.
Britain, 1958. In a land still recovering from the ravages of war, a powerful force was emerging. It was cheap, it was cheerful, and it pulled in the crowds in their millions.
Oh, excellent. Well done, Nation.
Well, it seems a little bit rickety, Doctor.
Is it? Yes, well, of course, it's fairly easy to get it up. It's getting it to stay up. That's what counts.
We will get one night off a week, won't we?
Of course. You married?
Oh, no. Only I belong to this rambling club, you see. And so does a very nice girl, too. And, well, once a week we do like to go as far as we can.
Yes, the Carry On films. Over 2 programs, we're going to celebrate the creation of a comedy classic and investigate the performers who kept it up for over 20 years.
It's going to be a well-packed couple of programs. Yes, sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? No, stop messing about.
Can I get a word in here? Hello. I'm Leslie Phillips, and you're listening to Carry On Forever on BBC Radio 2, an in-depth probe into the world of Carry On.
Who's that? Miss Alcock.
Miss Alcock. Ding dong.
We were like school kids. We were a very innocent bunch of thesps, and we used to get together, you know, first of all for 6 weeks of a year, and following on from that we would meet for 12 weeks of the year, because each film took 6 weeks to make. And it was lovely. There was a great camaraderie, and we were a wonderful team. Nobody had, you know, big heads. There were no star people about. They were just happy times.
I think they were very popular because they touched on serious subjects and took the mickey out of everything, didn't they? And they were over the top. It's quite extraordinary, but they've actually been sold virtually worldwide. I mean, you really would think they were just for the British public, but not so, not so.
Not for me, thank you.
No, don't drink.
No, I tried it once and didn't like it.
Oh. Have a smoke?
I tried it once and didn't like it.
Strange.
Not at all, my daughter is just the same.
Your only child, I presume?
If you ever looked at a Seaside postcard and laughed because it was a bit rude, but it was acceptably rude, but I think that's the reason. It was like Seaside, you know, our end of the pier humour, and they went very, very close to an awful lot of things, but it was acceptable. It was British, you know, sort of bawdy type humour.
It's pantomime on film. Little bit rude, perhaps, but does it matter? But there's no aggression.
In addition to taking French and music, Mr. Bean organises and conducts our school orchestra. We call him our Malcolm Sargent of Magdalen Street.
Doesn't that interfere with their schoolwork at all?
On the contrary, madam. My theory of music teaching is...
Alcock.
I beg your pardon.
The Carry On team were almost like an exaggeration of the extended British family, from Sid James' Skirt Chasers to Charles Hawtrey's Mummy's Boy. They reflected people we'd all met.
Oh, you speak for yourself, mate. Oh,
I think in the day the Carry-Ons were majorly popular because they were filling a gap that was left with the music halls closing down.
Author of numerous Carry On books, Robert Ross.
The whole sort of vaudeville tradition had gone from our variety theatres, and I think British people liked jokes about bodily functions and sex and alcohol and going on holiday, and the Carry On team filled that gap, you know, for 20 years, and they touched topics like the army and the police and the hospitals and that sort of stuff. So that's why they were popular then, and that's why they're also popular now, because they're not really satire. They're not Peter Cook and Dudley Moore or the Pythons. They're just being, you know, funny, and the topics they poked fun at have never really changed.
Here's Steve Gerrard, a lecturer in film and media studies at Lampeter University.
We identify with Sid, Joan, Barbara, Jim Dale, Kenneth Connor. We all know people like Sid James. I know people like Hattie Jakes. And so the audience almost bonded with the characters, the family that they see on screen. They're actually extensions, in a way, of their own families.
But how did it all begin?
Carry On Sergeant wasn't a comedy to start with. It was a very serious subject about a ballet dancer.
Carry On producer Peter Rogers.
Who was called up, and their romance, a boy and girl.
From that first Carry On, here's actress Shirley Eaton.
The drama is we're not together on our first night, and then I smuggle myself into the barracks and go and work in the kitchen with Dora Bryan, and that's the sort of character, and we managed to get together during the comings and goings of that situation.
You're the new girl, aren't you? My name's Mary. I don't care what your name is, as long as you can cut chips. Here, where's your labour exchange card?
It's coming in the post. Oh, I'm not really the new girl, but please don't give me away. Please help me.
Oh, there, love. Come on, tell Nora all about it.
And here's the man who nearly penned that first film, writer John Antrobus.
I was asked to write a screenplay for the first film, Carry On Sergeant, for £500. However, I know that I was also contractually given 2.5% of Carry On Sergeant. Only later in the proceedings, when it was decided that my script would not be used, but they used some of my script, and Peter Rogers wrote to my agent, Beryl Virtue, and said it would be grossly unfair for John to retain the 2.5%. Would he give it up? So with that sort of gentle persuasion, we graciously left it to him, and he removed the 2.5%.
Rogers had the script rewritten by Norman Hudis, and the film was shot quickly on a budget of less than $75,000.
Peter Rogers always said Norman Hudis put heart into the carry-ons, and that's true. I mean, if you watch the first 6 that Norman wrote, they're all about community and about togetherness.
Robert Ross.
Because they're based in institutions, you know. You've got the army, you've got the hospital, you've got a school, police, Regardless, which is sort of like a little helping hands agency that does anything, anywhere, misses, and Cruising, which is about a boat, not about anything else. And it's so those first 6 are really sort of warm-hearted and lovable and sweet, really. And they're a little bit coy now. If you watch them, they're a little bit sort of, that's not really Carry On, because people expect, bras popping off and Sid lusting after teenagers and all that sort of thing.
Oh, hello.
Hawtrey? Never mind Hawtrey. What about me? When do I get on? Oh, it's a disgrace.
Hello. Hello. Agent Bind. James? No, Charlie. Number? 000. Oh. Oh, what? I have no idea. And they looked at me and they said, uh-oh. Oh.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I was seen in a television series playing an army man. That gave them the idea of Charles might be right for this part. Well, it was made for about 3pence, and it made a fortune. Hence the series.
Actor and Carry On fan, David Benson.
He was a highly eccentric character, and almost, I think, beyond playing in a film or anything, because he was so far out there almost nobody would believe it. One of the things I think that made the Carry On films unique and watchable, and I don't really like a Carry On film unless he's in it.
Valerie Lyon's first Carry On was opposite Hawtrey in Carry On Camping.
I was a store assistant, and Charlie Hawtrey was desperate to buy a tent, and we had this wonderful little moment in the tent, and then the store manager comes along and thinks, what in the world are we getting up to? And we both come up, and he said, she was showing me how to stick up my pole, but the censors caused Gerald Thomas, the director, and Peter Rogers so much difficulty. The line had to be changed to, she was showing me how to stick up the pole.
'70s Carry On star, Kenneth Cope.
Charlie was a man on his own. He used to come, we used to see him arriving at Pinewood with his little plastic bag with his lunch and everything else in it. And he was lovely, but a loner. He was... We never sort of drank in the bar afterwards. We had drunken lunches when we'd finished for the day early or whatever. But Charlie was a man on his own, a loner. He used to come on a bus, on a train or whatever. And the poor man died in poverty. And we were all very, very sad about that. It's just sad, these things. Sad, totally sad.
We'd sit sometimes and we'd play poker.
Liz Fraser.
We would play for pennies. We weren't sort of into great sums of money with the poker. But Charles had a little purse, a little do-up purse with his sort of pennies in it. And he'd put his little glasses on and he'd sort of peer in the purse before he made any sort of bid.
He was in every single film, apart from one, from 1958 to 1972. That's a long time. Every Carry On film, apart from Carry On Cruising. That was number 6. He basically... On the set of Regardless, apparently he turned around to Peter Rogers and said, I really think I should be getting more funny lines, more the funny material. I am a comedian. And Peter said, your secret is safe with me, which I thought was always quite a good put down. So for Cruising, when he wanted more money and the killer was a star in his dressing room door, which no one got that. Not even Sid James got a star in his dressing room door. So Hawtrey was out for cruising, and they brought Lance Percival in for about £500, which was about £3,000 less than Hawtrey got. And then suddenly he came back. They were doing Carry On Cabby, and it was during that time when Rothwell came in as writer, so it was going to be made as Call Me a Cab. So Hawtrey came back for that one, and he was there for the next 10 years. But just a brilliant comedy actor, and just the most photogenic face in the entire series. He just looks so good on camera.
After Carry On Abroad, Hawtrey never appeared again. Here's series producer Peter Rogers.
He became rather difficult and impossible to deal with because he was drinking a lot. We used to feed him black coffee before he'd go on. It really became wasting time.
Sergeant was also the first film for Kenneth.
It's about time. Here we go.
Connor.
What? Kenneth who? Before me? Oh, this is ridiculous. I've never been so appallingly treated all my life.
All coming together was great because we'd known each other a long time in radio. Most of these people were known for many years before. We used to play all the funny characters, those who knocked at the door, judges, solicitors, policemen, that sort of thing, And that's where we all met up. There was Charlie Hawtrey, Kenneth Williams, myself, and all of that time were going strong. The first one was vastly enjoyable because of all the marching and things. We went to a proper barracks and things to march around for the passing out parade and things. And a lot of us were a few years of leaving the army. And the second and third files were made up by actors who had only just left doing their national service. So all that square bashing was quite a delight to do.
Are you a regular?
No, national service. Here, what about your training? Don't do it anymore. Oh, I don't want to try again.
Again? How many courses have you been through?
3, I think. There's me excuse webbing chit, me excuse marching chit, chit for... Blimey, you're just an heap of chits.
70s carry-on girl, Jackie Piper.
Well, Kenny Connor was so unbelievably underrated and talented, and sometimes if we were sitting in the wings, he'd do some sort of act in the wings for us, which was incredibly difficult. You don't realise how talented that man was, and he never really had the success that he deserved. But then who does in life? Life's not like that.
Kenneth was brilliant. Kenneth did a lot of radio. Kenneth had a wealth of voices.
Liz Fraser.
But on the screen, he was good, he was funny, he was intelligent, he was married, and I just mentioned that because I think he was very much a home person.
Because they were billed alphabetically originally, Kenneth Connor was the star of Carry On for the first few years. It was Kenneth Connor and Shirley Eaton because they were alphabetical. And then they started moving them around a bit.
Robert Ross.
But if you watch those early films, and he was a cute little boy, Kenneth, actually, a good-looking guy, and played those sort of characters sort of quite weak, but had the ability to sort of come through and win in the end, like Horace Strong in Carry On Sergeant, begins his army career as his hypochondriac, but then ends up as this sort of like Superman character. And then he dropped out of the films for a long time in the golden era, sort of late 60s, and came back and just had this fine line in sort of slightly dirty, scruffy old men and perverted sort of majors and army captains and these sort of things. But again, he was in the very first one and the very last of the original, Emmanuel. So he had that run, a la Kenneth Williams.
Yes, I was in the first one too. Get on with it, Phillips. I'm on the verge.
And of course, Carry On Sergeant also featured Kenneth Williams.
And about time too. Yes.
The funniest thing about Kenneth Williams was that he was only happy if he had an audience. And if he wasn't in the mood, he would sit there, and everybody knew this. And wherever we were working, and there were some extraordinary things he used to do. I remember in Constable, and we were in Ealing and in a house, and he went out dressed as a constable, and he blew a whistle and put his hand up and stopped the traffic. And people thought he was a real copper. He stopped the traffic, and then after a few minutes, when there's a line-up coming, he then put his other arm up and stopped the traffic coming the other way. So he kept the entire group of drivers both ways and nobody complained. And he kept them there for ages, and we were all roaring with laughter, you know. And then eventually he let them all go, and then there was a very old lady walking up the road, and Kenny wanted to have a pee. So he took out his willy and started to pee in a drain. And there was an old lady, very old, and she had a stick, and she was sort of moving along the path. And she suddenly looked and saw Kenny with his willy out, dressed as a constable. And she couldn't believe it. She nearly died. We all wandered off, you know.
Kenneth Williams, I think, was probably one of the funniest raconteurs that I've ever worked with.
Here's Liz Fraser again.
He would give wonderful sort of anecdotes and things if we were on location and we'd all be in some sort of caravan or mobile home or something. And he was brilliant. I mean, he was different, I think, in a lot of ways from the rest of us. He kept himself more to himself.
Who are you?
James Bailey, BSc Economics.
Your number?
I'm not proud of it. It was given to me. I earned my degree.
Your rank?
Well, that's a matter of opinion.
Look at this man.
You've nothing to complain of. Look at the suit they've given me. As a good soldier, I accepted it without complaint. As a good officer, what do you think?
Fall out. Get yourself a new hat.
Excuse me.
Of course. What?
Carry On director Gerald Thomas.
Is a baby physically, and he can't stand the sight of blood, and he can't stand hurting himself. And I had to get him to put his hand through a plate glass window and carry on spying. Well, obviously it wasn't going to be plate glass, it was a thing that we call sugar glass, which is quite safe, and it just, as soon as you blow on it, it disintegrates, but he wouldn't do this. And I said, well, look, it's perfectly all right, Kenny, and I took my hand and I punched it through the glass. I said, there you are, nothing happened. And I looked down, I could see my hand was pouring with blood, so I quickly stuffed it in my pocket. And he went for a take, and it was all right. And after the take, I took my hand out, unwrapped my handkerchief, and you could see all the blood, and he promptly fainted.
On one occasion, I think it was on Carry On Regardless, he was, for some unknown reason, he fell down the back of the flat of the set.
Peter Rogers.
And scraped himself in an unmentionable part of his body. So we took him along to medical. And in medical at that time, there was a sister who you could have cast in a Hammer film. And he was gone for so long that Gerald and I went down to this medical, thought, where the hell is he? He was lying on this bed, and she was slapping some salve on his penis, and he was thoroughly enjoying himself. He could have stayed there all the afternoon.
There's a tremendously childish element in me. I think it's Freud somewhere that says when the child is finished in a man, the man himself is finished. You know, the mind is closed, and it's only the open mind, the receptive mind, that's capable of any kind of creativity.
Much has already been said about Kenny's character. Perhaps the last word on people's attempts to analyse others should go to the man himself, speaking here in 1963.
I think all this psychoanalysis is a load of rubbish. It's like, water. They say, analyse water. It's all right, you analyse water. When you do analyse water, H2O, what you're left with is nothing you can drink, is it? You can't drink it, can you? What you're left with. And this is the same with all analysis. It's very dangerous, this whole process of imagining that you can analyse and find out all about people. You can't. They're all mysteries. They're all mysterious and weird, and you've got to accept that. It's part of the marvellousness of life, isn't it? The wealth of variety that everyone represents. Accept them. I think that's the whole point, don't you? To accept.
1970s carry-on player, Kenneth Cope.
Kenny had this marvellous idea in the Pinewood restaurant that if we all on a queue burst out laughing uproariously, really madly, on a queue, and he said, you've got somebody to come up. And we did. We just burst out laughing. The whole table was rocking like crazy. Eventually somebody came and said, what was the joke? What was the joke? What was the joke? Of course there wasn't one, except we lured them into coming to our table. And he was, I know that sounds a bit tame and silly now, but they'd always try it at a party sometime. It works. It's very good. Somebody will always wonder and say, what was it?
There were never really any stars in the Carry On series. From the very start, it operated as a kind of repertory company, as Shirley Eaton remembers.
Each film we make, everybody, is like it becomes like a little family. And when there's a film with a lot of cast, it's really very relaxed in a way because you're all sharing everything and reacting to each other, both on and off the set.
When you open a gaff, an enterprise like this, you have got to employ people with know-how, flexibility, people who are ready to undertake anything for anybody. That's the whole idea behind Helping Hands.
Never mind, Mr. Handy, dear. I'm sure you'll get staffed.
Here's Jackie Piper again.
We were like a sort of family there because we used to meet each other twice a year, and all the people were the same: the camera crew, the makeup, the hair, most of the cast, and it was just the most wonderful fun. I mean, I can't believe I was lucky enough to be part of that crew, really. It's great.
Working in a carry-on film, one is required really to have a certain attitude. It's got to be a very professional attitude because there isn't very much time to make the film, and they do quite long scenes, and you've really got to know them. And I think you can only know them and work them with people like Kenneth Williams and Sid James, who are themselves very professional, and there's so much give and take. No one tries to stand out in the film or try and star in the film. They wouldn't be allowed to if they did, and people who have come into them and have tried have been cut down and not in others. It's literally a terrible old thing to say, a team thing.
Everybody be fooling around. Kenny, of course, was the most terrible practical joker. There'd always be rows going on between Kenny and Charlie, because Charlie used to come onto the set, with his plastic bag with his newspaper in it and his packet of Woodbines and his sandwiches and a bottle of Coke or Tizer or whatever it was in those days. And every single day, Kenny Williams would hide it. And then when he wanted to go and sit quietly in a corner and do his Times crossword or whatever it was that he had his pencil and his paper for, and eat his sarnie and drink his Tizer, it was gone. And then there'd be this terrible rush and went on all the time. It's so tedious to have the same joke, but it went on always. And then on the floor would come the first assistant, and he'd go, "All right, chaps, be loyal." And as soon as he said, "Be loyal," it stopped. All the fooling about stopped, and everybody was right into the job.
Carry On regulars Peter Butterworth and my old friend John Pertwee.
Gerald Thomas was very, very efficient, and we were all efficient. And he gathered a gang of people around who were all experienced. There were none of us who just sort of popped up from nowhere. We'd all had a background, whether it was stage, film or radio, and we knew our jobs. And he put a group of professional people together who were all comedic and all liked each other. Consequently, we all knew our lines. There was never any messing around, which is exactly how Gerald Thomas liked it. And we would invariably do one take, whereas on a lot of other films, they do take after take after take and then choose.
And the rumour was that if you went to a second take, it went straight round Pinewood because Kenny Connor's gone to a second take or something's happened, and it was you just had to get it right first time.
Kenneth Cope.
Sid James never fluffed. I don't think any of us ever fluffed. We just got it right because we were all pros. We'd done weekly rep. We'd done all sorts of stage stuff. And you turned up knowing your dialogue because of the discipline that used to be in those days.
Having a rep company meant everyone knew each other intimately. And it's just as well, as Liz Fraser remembers.
It was really nice for me because I knew the whole cast. And what was amazing about the Carry-Ons was it was a 6-week schedule. And that was it. It was a 6-week schedule. And at the beginning of the last week, up on the notice board would go, there was an end of film party at 6 o'clock on the Friday. And at 6 o'clock on the Friday, we were completely finished. And if we weren't, then they would have cut that scene.
The critics' response to the first Carry On film was half-hearted, to say the least. However, Carry On Sergeant reached number 3 in the UK box office chart, just behind Dunkirk and Bridge on the River Kwai. And so Rogers decided to make another. The subject was the NHS, and that was when I joined the cast. Daffodils at the ready, everyone. I was in Hollywood, my first visit to Hollywood, and I had a very nice part in a big movie. And so I got back, and of course, when you've been to Hollywood, you're quite a target for people who are making films. They think, well, if you go to Hollywood, you must be terribly good. One script was dropped into my lap, and it was Carry On Nurse. And my agent said, well, read it, because we'll have to like it a lot, because there's no money. Anyway, I read the script. It was the funniest script I've ever read. And I said to my agent, I've got to do this. I've got to be in this, because it is such a wonderful script.
I'd owned Ring for Catties since it was produced first at Richmond, and I liked the subject, and then I did the same with that as I did with Sergeant. I turned it into a comedy.
And one of the nurses in question was Shirley Eaton.
Carry On Nurse was a little diamond, that particular one. It was so much more fun than Carry On Sergeant. We did a lot on location somewhere in England. There was more comradeship in Carry On Nurse because we were all in this basic set. The first time I went to New York, I went there with the publicity people from Pinewood, and they weren't sure that Americans, because we do have different humour sometimes, not so much now, but we used to, and did publicity for it, of course, and did all the normal interviews and everything. And then we went out of town. They showed it out of town, like they slipped it in between other things, and people were rolling about because they hadn't expected to see. I don't know how they advertised it, to tell you the truth, but I know it was a preview, a sneak view type of thing, and they loved it. They absolutely loved Carry On Nurse.
And of course, that film gave us a classic Carry On moment.
I have a lot to do today, sister. I must get through my rounds early.
Come in.
Colonel, whatever's going on?
Come, Matron. Surely you've seen a temperature taken like this before?
Yes, Colonel, many times. But never with a daffodil.
There was a scene with Joan Sims. Now, I adored Joan Sims, where she played a dithery nurse that does everything wrong. I was in the scene with her and Joan Hickson, I think, and those two were really the main part of the scene. But it was hysterical. It was hysterical, and she had to keep falling on the floor, Joni, and it was one of those happy, wonderful moments. And the director, when we did used to lose it on those films, the director never got cross because it was everybody was doing it, and then he said, "Come on, let's pull ourselves together and get on with this."
Shirley Eaton remembering Joni. If anyone knew about working on the Carry On films, it was Joan Sims.
I mean, some of the conditions were absolutely appalling under which we worked, you know. I mean, when we did camping, we literally were up to our ankles in mud, and it was freezing cold. I mean, poor Barbara, worst of the lot when the bra had to come off. But, I mean, and we did have to sort of nudge them quite hard to say, look, could we have a caravan, please, to sit in? Because we're actually freezing cold on these canvas chairs. And the props boys would be rushing round and saying, do you want a blanket? They didn't think about the actors.
You're listening to Carry On Forever on BBC Radio 2. Yes, very good, isn't it? Oh, isn't it good? Well, please yourselves.
As those early films show, one of the mainstays of Carry On humour was the sending up of British institutions and customs.
The actual parodies, the film parodies they tended to do were British subjects anyway.
Robert Ross.
So they tended to take on things like the James Bond series or the Hammer Horror and do the Carry On version of it.
Nurse, for example, was only the first of a series of pokes at the NHS. The team would return to the subject in Carry On Doctor, Carry On Again Doctor, and Carry On Matron.
Nurse Dawson, how dare you burst in like that? Oh, just a minute. Bloody thing. It's Matron's round.
Well, mine's a point.
A mention of matrons brings us to Hattie Jakes.
The first impression of Hattie Jakes was the largesse, but also the warmth of the lady. That's what came first, before I actually worked with her on Carry On Doctor.
Anita Harris.
And if I can tell you, she looked after her mother, and she was a wonderful cook. Okay? So in her apartment would be all these out-of-work actors on a Sunday being fed by this fabulous woman, this great cook. So Hattie, for me, wasn't just that woman in the movies and who I was proud to be working with, but Hattie was this warm, lovely woman.
If you are under a certain age and over a certain measurement, you have to be a comic. If you're a lady, you have to be a funny lady. Nobody ever gives you the opportunity of doing anything straight. I mean, if you're a fat girl like I have always been, then it's impossible for you to be a normal character in a play. I mean, no one would ever sort of fall in love with you, or you couldn't be married and have kids.
Don't lie to me, Sidney Bliss. You were with that woman, Esme Crowfoot, all evening.
I keep telling you, I only popped in for a bit. Half an hour, that's all. That's not long.
That's long enough for you.
I can't fix them up with the right partners until I find out what they do and how they live.
Like the young widow at the tobacconist's. You must have vetted her at least 50 times.
Oh, good. I only keep going in there for me shag.
She was just a very lovely person. We all describe Hattie in different ways, and I think someone said she was like a mother hen. All I can say about Hattie was that she was a very lovely, warm character, completely a one-off. I don't think there would have ever been any malice in her at all. And her stature made her like a sort of a wonderful female Father Christmas.
She was absolutely, absolutely charming every day. Never changed, never any moves or anything. And rock hard on her lines and rock hard in the scene. And just nice to be with, and particularly the luncheons and stuff. But she was lovely, adored her tremendously.
Liz Fraser and Kenneth Cope.
Oh, matron, take them away!
Other bastions of Britain that were lampooned by the Carry-Ons included the monarchy in Carry On Henry and the Empire in Carry On Up the Khyber.
I remember one critic saying they felt I was confined, and because of the very sober nature of this Eastern potentate, my own kind of demonic and hysterical humour wasn't really allowed full reign. But I thought it was lovely, and I adored the costume too, and the sets were absolutely magnificent. They were marvellous. And also it included location, don't forget, we went to Snowdonia for the Khyber Pass. That region, when you photographed, you know, closely, can be very like that northern part of India.
We all thought that we were going to be able to go to Spain to do it originally, but when they found it was going to cost more than 40 quid a head, they stopped it. And so we went up to the national park and stayed in Bethgelert. And from where we were working, we could look across. There was a gap in the hills, and we could see the end of the Sixth Heckler slowly disintegrating on the other side, all the plaster falling about. But we had a very good time up there, and it really looked like the Northwest frontier. But we'd have liked to have stayed a couple more days, but Gregory Peck had arrived in Bethgelert with his company, and they were doing something on the Hong Kong border, and he wanted our bit of the Northwest frontier for it.
Khyber co-star Peter Butterworth. And Khyber wasn't the first film to fudge its location. When a script was proposed with a Sahara setting, Camber Sands was the obvious location. But with a title like Carry On, Follow That Camel, one ingredient was essential.
Because we had to have a camel, obviously. You can't have a follow that camel with no camel.
Series director, Gerald Thomas.
And the only camel we could get was from Chessington Zoo. And that was sent down in an enormous great pantechnicon, and on the way down it was stopped by the police because the camel's head was poking over the top and causing traffic jams. So they had to cover the camel. They got it down there, and the following morning I went onto the location ready to shoot, and I said, right, let's have the camel. And the camel's keeper was there, and he couldn't move it. And I said, what's wrong? He said, well, it's never been on sand. And it was a camel that was born in captivity, had always lived on concrete. And they got it there, and I had to start shooting other sequences and give them 2 days to train a camel how to walk across the sand.
Also, from Carry On, Follow That Camel, here's Anita Harris.
Follow That Camel came about because I was working at the Prince of Wales Theatre in review with Frankie Howard.
No, don't. Yeah, please yourself.
One evening, Peter Rogers and Gerald Thomas come to see Frankie to talk about his next Carry On movie. And they watched the show, and they came to the dressing room afterwards, and they offered me the movie. Can you imagine? I was 20-something, and I was so happy.
Don't shut your face. No, don't laugh.
And I had to be the makeup, because in those days there weren't tanning salons. I had to have a body makeup, and it was called Pancake, and it was put on with a very cold sponge. So the first thing was, before I had any facial makeup on, was the body makeup, so it would dry in time. It was freezing. It was freezing. And we would stand under the arc lights on this beach.
So with budgets kept low, exotic locations were avoided, and star names frowned upon. The series tried to compete with Hollywood. You've got to admire their pluck.
I don't like the look of this mob. I think you better give them a bit of the old flannel.
Oh, yes, I've got my flannel ones on.
No. Make a speech. Win them over.
Oh, well, if you think so.
Yes, go on.
Friends! Romans!
Countrymen.
I know.
Well, get on with it, then.
Here's Steve Gerrard again.
The Carry On movies began to reflect genre cinema. And so you have the James Bond phenomenon. It had been going for 3 or 4 years. Along comes Carry On Spying. They do such a wonderful spoof of it. And they also look back to other British movies such as The Third Man. That's another part of that particular film. What the Carry On movies did was basically spoof them. They take the familiar and just give them a slight twist. They gently mock.
I mean, any aspect of drama which shows us ourselves, I mean, in a laugh-at-yourself light, is a good thing.
Kenneth Williams.
I loved the idea of, anyway, pomposity being pricked and the balloon punctured. I think that's one of the most essential ingredients in satire.
We were calling Charlie Hawtrey 006.5, I think it was, or something like that.
Peter Rogers.
And Cubby's partner, Harry Saltzman, went to his lawyer, and the lawyer got onto me and said that they would sue if I used it. I said, all right, I'll change it. Doesn't matter. Still funny.
And of course, Carry On Spying saw the first ever appearance of...
Trainee Agent Daphne Honeybutt, sir.
Number?
382235.
No, your number, not your vital thingamajigs.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I forgot where I was for the moment. Actually, it's 4711.
Have you had any experience?
Oh, yes, a little.
The incomparable Barbara Windsor.
It's like you've heard the Hitchcock blonde. There's the Carry On blonde. So through the history of Carry On, you had Shirley Eaton, who was quite prim and proper, looked amazing.
Robert Ross.
But she was quite a refined young lady. You wouldn't kiss her on the first date, sort of character. Then Liz Fraser came in, who was a bit saucier and a bit sassier, but still had her cool moments. Barbara Windsor was a sort of giggling, bubbly, sort of bundle of energy who just came in for Carry On Spying and just nailed it really completely. And she wasn't in many. I mean, people are convinced she was in hundreds, but she did 10. She did 9 sort of narrative films, and she hosted That's Carry On, the compilation film with Kenneth Williams. But she had, like Sid James, she had this almost cartoon character quality about her that just stuck in your mind, and for the majority of people, that is Carry On. Barbara and Sid, together is Carry On.
We got enough out there for a good collection?
Oh, I'll just pop out and see.
You pop out any more, we'll have standing room only.
Is she always on time? Oh, Barbara is absolutely on time. So she'd be in the makeup room. Cup of tea, love? She'd be there first, always first.
Anita Harris.
And again, you learn from these people because it's very important to be on time. You can't be late, even if you didn't get to bed till 2 o'clock in the morning. You've got to be there on time. And she is a very, very clever girl. And she started her career with Joan Littlewood. So all of that structure came into her work on camera.
Good evening.
Oh, hi. Oh, what a lovely looking pair.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
For many, though, the ultimate British version of a Hollywood film has to be Carry On, Cowboy.
Carry on, cowboy, born to ride the range you love. Cross the wide prairie with the burning sun above. Till you hang up your saddle, lay down your gun, till the last stray's been branded. Oh, cowboy, carry on.
I'll just take that gun of yours, cowboy.
What for?
I don't allow no shooting at my place.
Lady, I wouldn't dream of shooting at your place.
I'm not afraid to use this, you know. My, but you got a big one.
I'm from Texas, ma'am. We all got big ones down there.
With genre parodies comes familiarity. So in the Western, you have cowboys, Native Americans, a barroom brawl, all these sort of elements, the landscape, things like that.
Steve Gerrard.
Where they break away from that mould and give a really unique slant on a genre is in Carry On Cowboy, which again uses the same formula, the same basic narratives, the same almost sketch show approach. But how could you ever resist Sid James as the Rumpo Kid? I think it's lovely that you've got this wonderful Western movie, a good, solid spoof, which pokes fun in a really kind way at the genre.
For series director Gerald Thomas, the film's location was to prove the main headache.
We had one sequence where the coach was driving across Chobham Common, which were the sort of prairies of Texas or wherever it is, and I had a long shot of the coach with Jim Dale driving it, and there was supposed to be all the dust coming up from behind, and we had to have 2 prop men in the coach puffing full as earth out of the back to make the dust, and this dust was coming up as they were going through 3-foot puddles of water. And it was the most amazing. It's still in the picture, actually. You can see them going through water and dust flying everywhere.
Now, did you know that Cowboy was the favourite carry-on of the man many still think of as the real star of the series?
That's me. Well, you know, it's taking the mick out of every Western that ever was. There's no real storyline. I come into town, the town of Stodge City, and first thing I do is shoot 3 fellas, and I take the town over. I start running it, and it's as simple as that. I don't get knocked off. I kill a few people, and I get saved in the end.
I mean, come on. Sid James is a cowboy. It's rank stupidity.
Well, I don't know. I suppose I got the sort of face. Perhaps it's the way I walk. Or perhaps it's the way I can't ride a horse that made him give me the part, you know.
Sid James was a great guy. He was very, very generous.
Kenneth Cope.
And all that rubbish about him petting and, you know, chasing women, I didn't see any of that really. I was, you know, we're in each other's pockets for weeks at a time. He was a very, very generous man, very funny, and very easy to work with because he was never pulled any stardom rubbish. None of them ever did.
Ooh, doesn't he carry on?
I always smiled warmly because he was so gentle and so sweet, and I was terribly young and ingenue and a bit like a father figure, I suppose, at the time. How clever he was.
Sid James obviously was an amazing character actor who had a long career before Carry On, but had become a major comedy star via two things: Ealing Studios and Hancock's Half Hour.
Robert Ross.
And I think the thinking was, because they had Kenneth Williams and Hattie Jacques on board for the films, to bring Sid in for the fourth one, Carry On Constable. And once Sid came in, there's just an injection of he was just the perfect Carry On actor. He just made for those films. So his contribution: 19 films, loads of TV specials, the stage show, Carry On London. Over a period of 14, 15 years, he was the king of Carry On, and he's still my favourite actor, probably one of my favourite people.
Of course, Sid also had a part in the most famous parody of them all, Carry On Cleo, which bore an uncanny resemblance to the Burton and Taylor film, Cleopatra.
They threatened to sue us. In fact, they did sue us because they claimed that our poster copied their poster.
Gerald Thomas.
I suppose, in point of fact, it virtually did copy their poster. It was very similar, except that Amanda Barry took the place of Elizabeth Taylor's face, and Sid James, Richard Burton's. We actually never went to judgment. We had a marvellous barrister. He discovered that the 20th Century Fox poster was a direct copy of a painting in a museum in Italy, which was very much out of copyright by hundreds of years. So in point of fact, we couldn't be copying a copyright because it didn't exist, and they eventually withdrew it, but it was marvellous publicity for us.
One of the critics at the press show, in his kindness, rang up Marks and Spencer and said, "Did you know that in this Carry On there is a slave market called Marcus and Spencer's?"
Peter Rogers.
"And it's set out in your trademark green." So Marks and Spencer's got onto us and so on. And the thief said, "Oh, don't worry about that. Just write a letter to the Daily Express saying that no intention and all the rest of it." But he said, later on, "Don't even do that." So it was only brought about by some kind critic who thought he'd make a fuss.
Oh, my sense is deserting me. There's something funny going on here. Villiers, what are you doing with your thing?
I'm sorry, sir, but for the good of Rome, you must die.
But you're my personal bodyguard and champion gladiator. I don't want to die. I may not be a very good live emperor, but I'd be a worse one dead. Treachery! Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for me.
Classic Carry On, even if it was borrowed from the 1950s radio show Take It From Here.
There was a time when Frank and I had a kind of cell in a collective of writers who worked at the premises of Ted Kavanagh, who was one of the first or possibly the first great scriptwriter.
Dennis Norton.
And in two cells along, as it were, and we all worked together, there was Sid Collin and Talbot Rothwell. And there was no competitiveness among us. And if we were stuck, we would go next door and say, "Hey, look, we're stuck. We've got the Napoleon on top of the Alps." And there was one time when Talbot Rothwell was writing one of the Carry On films, and he came in and he said, "Look, I'm stuck. You did a line in one of the Take It From Here's where Jimmy Edwards says, 'Oh, infamy, infamy, they've all got it, infamy. Can I borrow it?' Now, as far as we were concerned, jokes and lines were simply the small change of comedy. Once you'd done it, you got your use out of it, anybody's welcome to it. So we gave it to him. And he always acknowledged that he had got it from one of the Take It From Here programmes.
Talbot had taken over writing duties with Cabby and carried on until Carry On Dick.
Norman Huddis wrote the first 6 movies, but Norman Huddis went to America to work.
Steve Gerrard again.
Then Talbot Rothwell, who was much more interested in Max Miller, the old music hall artist, the music hall tradition, the Saucy Seaside Postcards of Donald McGill. He was much more interested in using them as his basis for his narrative.
there's a sort of juxtaposition, two films, Carry On Cabby and Carry On Jack, which he wrote Jack first, but they made Cabby first, and those two literally changed the entire series forever overnight. I've often wondered, just audience members sat having seen those first 6 films. You go and see Carry On Cabby, okay, it's a sort of kitchen sink drama, it's quite gritty. There's talk about divorces in it, and there's Sid James becoming an alcoholic, and it's quite grim, really, Cabby in parts. And then Carry On Jack, which is like a historical epic. You think, what's this? This is not Carry On. And then it went into that golden era of the parodies, the Cleos and Cowboys and Screamings and those sort of things. Basically, the films that the public would remember are the ones that Rothwell wrote. Carry On Camping, Carry On Doctor, Carry On Up the Khyber, those sort of films, which are all that sort of what you would call the Carry On cliches, really, the sort of the bra popping sort of Sid leching after people, and they're the ones that people think Carry On means.
He wrote 20 of them, and he was a wonderful writer. I mean, really underestimated, grossly underestimated writer.
Bernard Bresslaw.
But he had a way and a knack of turning an innuendo that just cannot be repeated.
Why, whenever I show any interest in a man, do they ignore it? Why? Haven't I got appeal?
Yes, but so's a banana, and I don't even want that.
Well, sadly, that's about all we can manage in this session. We'll look into more detail at the pay deals tomorrow, plus the films that were never made.
Yes, I'd have been a scream in Carry On Down Under. Yes, you should have seen my didgeridoo. Oh, yes.
And they also were talking about bringing Charles Hawtrey back. They announced another one called Carry On Down Under, and they always mentioned certain things like Carry On Dallas, and then we had Carry On London.
We'll also remember the TV shows and stage shows that the series spawned.
It was suddenly film and TV and stage. It was taking over multimedia in a way.
And there'll be more about me. Oh, yes, I'm the star, Oh, yes, I am. I'm a cult. Oh, I'm a huge cult. I'll get on with it. You have been listening to Carry On Forever. Oh, yes, it was presented by Leslie Phillips with additional voices of Kenneth Williams and Frankie Howard. Listen, I'll do my name if you don't mind. Those are provided by David Benson. Yes, never heard of him. It was written and produced by Phil... What's that name? Phil Collins. Collins, what's the matter with you? Can't you read? Yes, of course I can read, mate. And the executive producer was Ashley Byrne. See, I got that all right, didn't I? Yes, it was a made-in-Manchester production for... Go on. Oh, yes, BBC Radio 2. Yes, lovely. Yes, well, you mucked that out, didn't you? What do you mean I mucked that up? How dare you?